Hello, my loves, and welcome to the Native Growth Podcast, the podcast that nurtures your inner landscape by cultivating your authenticity, empowerment, and joy. I'm your hostess, Lauren Jean Brabson, and I'm so grateful you're here. Let's go ahead and dive in today. This is episode 7, and I'm calling it That Wasn't Supposed to Happen. And if you've been following me on Facebook or Instagram, you've probably already seen that this episode was in part inspired by a blog post that I had written actually in May of 2022. So this is not a very new idea for me, but I felt like it was an opportune time to share this idea because it kind of feeds back into the episode I published last week about expectations. Um, we have these ideas, these kinds of expectations around what we think our day is supposed to look like, what we think our week or our month is supposed to look like, especially for those of us who follow kind of like major lunations and cycles in astrology and human design and nature's seasons and all that kind of good stuff. We get these ideas in our head of like, oh, well, this will be a perfect time to do this, and this is what should happen when I do that, and um, and in reality, we know that that's not the way things always kind of go. And very often, as a result, we get so irritated. We're like, my day was supposed to go like this. And instead, this happened, and then that happened, and then this and that, and like all these things. And like my whole day just was, was off track. I was late to everything. I feel cranky now. I've been hungry all day. I haven't been able to eat, whatever it is, right? And so you can see how it feeds into this idea of expectations and kind of rolling over into, maybe this bigger idea of like what is supposed to happen, what isn't supposed to happen, and the ideas that we get both consciously and non-consciously around that. And we can look at it too, as I'm sure you've already gathered, in more of like small, micro kind of daily things. And then we can also look at it in terms of like more big picture things that really like disrupt our life journey or change its course in some kind of way. Um, you know, so so I just felt like it was a really opportune time to, visit this topic and explain a little bit more, some of the things that kind of go on. So, again, one of the things that we had talked about in the last episode around expectations is this idea of like the self-fulfilling prophecy. And I, again, I will fully admit that I used to be like the queen of the self-fulfilling prophecy bad days. I'd get up in the morning and really get this idea in my head of, where I was going to go and how my day was supposed to kind of unfold. And, maybe I would get stuck in traffic, or I would spill my coffee, or I would stub my toe on something or whatever. And it's like, oh, like that wasn't supposed to happen, and then you kind of, the whole idea of the self-fulfilling prophecy is that moving beyond that, you kind of immediately get this idea of not only was that not supposed to happen, but then you're like, well, now the rest of my day is just going to be awful. It's going to be terrible now. Like, well, oh, this is how my day is going to go, right? When I used to work at a law firm, some of my colleagues and I would call it the fucketing. It's like your day seemed, or your week maybe seemed like it was kind of going pretty okay, and then something happened that you just felt like was going to start the domino effect of a number of other annoying and irritating and terrible things for the rest of the week. And you're like, oh, there it is, the fucking So um it's so crazy how in our minds we think, it starts like, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen, and then it turns into like a whole butterfly effect. And I really think it's so worth um noting that just because we think, well, that wasn't supposed to happen, doesn't mean that it actually wasn't supposed to happen, right? And I'm sure that we all can look back on different things that have happened in our lives that we felt like were really challenging or maybe heartbreaking or just hard at the time, maybe just annoying or irritating, like whatever level that is. However, it was an inconvenience at the time, but then it actually turned out to be something really good, you know? So I know for me, I can think like years ago, kind of when I was still early on in my journey of training in traditional Chinese martial arts, um, I I became super passionate about it. I loved it, so I would train and practice even at home outside of class. And one day I was, just doing some different kinds of, punches and kicks and things like that at home, just kind of practicing and making sure I'm staying on top of it so that when I, come to like test time, then I feel as prepared as I possibly can, right? So I'm training at home and everything's fine. I go to work later that day, everything's fine, and then the next morning I get woken up out of my sleep super early. It's like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. I get woken up out of my sleep because my knee is in such excruciating pain. And I pull the covers off and I look, and my knee is like at least the size of a grapefruit. Like my knee was huge because I had overextended it when I had been training at home the night before, and that inflammation didn't take full effect in my knee until the next morning. And the most kind of like at the time it seemed really unfortunate thing about it was that it was so swollen that I couldn't even like pull my jeans up over it, and it hurt so badly to do anything. It hurt so badly to try to walk. It hurt so badly to try to bend that knee at all, even if I'm just trying to sit down or get in and out of the bathtub to take a shower. It was horrible. And the at the time I was still in college as well, and I worked as a bartender, and um our uniform was jeans. And I was like, well, if I can't even put my jeans on, like, how am I supposed to go to work? I can't wear jeans. I can't walk on it. It hurts to sit down. Like, I can't bartend like this. And so at the time, it seemed like, gosh darn it, like, this is not the way that my training was supposed to go. This isn't the way my weekend was supposed to go. Now I can't go to work and make my money. It just seemed like this was not what I had planned at all, and really irritating, and kind of, also let me down a lot because I loved bartending. I love seeing all of my customers, and I also love training and being in class with my fellow students. And I was like, well, now I can't do any of that until this heals up, and it's going to take weeks, but then very kind of like serendipitously around that same time, my sister, she was living like 5 to 6 hours away from me, and she had just kind of been going through this pretty rough breakup. And she called me one day, and she's just very, very upset. She's crying, and and I'm talking to her, and I just said, okay, what do you need? And I feel like it was just one of those things where she kind of partly wasn't sure exactly what she needed, and she also partly didn't want to come off as she was afraid of being a burden, And I was like, look, like, I can't go to work anyway, so why don't I just drop everything and I'll just come stay with you for a few days. I'll help you, just kind of stay with you and hold space. And if you, need whatever, like, I'll help you out to the best of my ability, So when I thought that I wasn't supposed to hurt my knee, apparently I actually was, because I needed to be able to not go to work, so that instead I could be in the car for several hours driving up north to be with my sister for those several days while my knee kind of took its time to heal anyway, right? I know even more recently, one of the apps that I like to use is part of how I'm now able to get this podcast out on YouTube, and I use it in my like social media marketing and stuff like that too. My app on my phone wasn't working, and I was like, oh darn it, like I get so like it's technology, like you love it and you hate it. It's great and it's also irritating, and I do try not to get irritated when it doesn't work because I know that everything is fixable, but I love what I do so much, and I love this podcast, and I love the feedback that I get from all of you. And so when one of my tools isn't working, I just feel so like irritated and disappointed. And I thought, well, this wasn't how this was supposed to go today. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. But then I, turned around and I was able to get really great customer service from the company. They had really super fast, email communication back and forth with me. They showed me how to fix it on their full web version, not just in the app. And when I pulled up their web version, I discovered way more capabilities than the app has. And that was how I was able to start getting some of just the audio portion of these podcasts up on YouTube that I didn't even know the app could do. So like we think things aren't supposed to happen, but in reality they are, because they're bringing us to where we need to be or to something better, right? And sometimes I think we get really caught up on little things, right? Like the last couple of things that I just talked about, they're not huge, but they're not tiny either, But I think sometimes it's almost like we get the most irritated when we think that we are supposed to be doing something a certain way. Does that make sense? When you're like, well, I'm trying to do this and it's not going right, like, and you think, it's a kind of a variation of like that wasn't supposed to happen, right? So I know that in a lot of the clients I've worked with and people I've talked to, meditation seems to be like a fairly common topic of conversation. And a lot of people, when they're less familiar with meditating, they expect it to go a certain way, right? They expect, like, oh, I'm just supposed to be able to lie down or sit or stand in a still position. I'm supposed to be able to just focus on my breath and kind of clear my head. Everything can slow down and I can feel, zen and at peace. And like in reality, that's not really how meditation goes at all. And so then when meditation does what it's supposed to do, which is really just helping us to be more aware of each one of our thoughts and feelings as they arise. But, when people think that the idea is to clear your mind and your heart, they're like, well, this isn't the way it's supposed to go. Isn't, this isn't working. Like, this isn't supposed to happen like this, right? And then I'm like, well, then, tell me about how your meditation is going. And they're like, well, I'm just thinking all of my thoughts. Then you're doing it right. That's how that is supposed to go. And again, we can even think of super, super tiny things like we're stuck in traffic, or we stub our toe, like we thought, when we got up in the morning, we're thinking like, oh, I'm going to wear like my favorite t-shirt today, my favorite pair of pants, I'm going to wear these shoes. And then you can't find that shirt or those pants anywhere because you threw them in the wash the night before and forgot to put them in the dryer. And so now you can't wear them. Like, it seems like a little thing. And sometimes we just get so irritated because we swear that wasn't the way that was supposed to happen. And when I think about the scenario of getting stuck in traffic, I very often think about all the people who were stuck in traffic on their way to work at the World Trade Center on 9/11. Like they were stuck in that traffic and they were thinking like, geez, like this is not the way my morning's supposed to go. I was supposed to be there a half an hour ago. Now I'm running super late. I'm missing this meeting. And, I can only imagine. And then as they're sitting there in traffic, 9/11 is unfolding right there in front of them. Like dang, actually you were supposed to be stuck in traffic that day, And so I know that that's something I continue to think about when I have mornings where I'm like, okay, well, I got to be, on this client call at a certain time. I got to record this podcast by a certain time of the day, X, Y, and Z. And, you're just trying to keep it together and keep the wheels on the bus and stay on time, and then things just kind of happen that push your timeline back. And we think like, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. But with that in the back of my mind, I always remind myself, well, you kind of never know what you're missing that you're supposed to miss. You never know what you're being redirected towards instead, So I definitely use that as like a big kind of like foundational example in my mind when I think like, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. Like, well, actually it probably was, right? Because it's again redirecting me or saving me from something else. I know like another kind of thing that happens in a day-to-day, and maybe this happens for a lot of you too, is like um again, little things like when you stub your toe on a piece of furniture, or like yesterday my husband was cooking lunch and he was making ramen, and he loves to put sesame seeds on the top, and he opened the container and like the sesame seeds came spilling out like all over the counter. And he's a very clean person, so he has this tendency to get really kind of irritated when he makes a mess. And I mean, I don't like making messes either, but it is what it is. um, but it's these little things we think like, gosh darn it, like that I was not supposed to do that. Like we immediately kind of get hard on ourselves about it too, in the way of like, that wasn't supposed to happen, like I wasn't supposed to do that. But in the same breath I would say like, well, maybe it was not necessarily for the purpose of redirecting you or saving you from something else, but maybe it was supposed to happen because you might be in a place in your life where you're thinking very much about a virtue that you're trying to embody a little bit more. You're trying to focus on being more patient, more joyful, more peaceful, more fulfilled, right? And the universe doesn't respond to that by snapping its fingers and going like, yep, there you are, you're more peaceful now. You don't get irritated at shit anymore, right? Like, that's not how that goes. What the universe does, as we know, is it gives us opportunities to embody that virtue, So I know my husband and I actually talk quite a bit about how we have really helped each other to grow in so many ways. And one of the things that my husband says about me is that I've helped him very much to have like greater perspective on things that help him to be more patient and peaceful. And so then when I see him spilling sesame seeds, I'm like, well, the universe is trying to give you an opportunity to be peaceful and not pissed. Peaceful over pissed. So again, it's like this whole idea of these preconceived notions that we kind of have about the way something is supposed to happen, like the process of what an unfolding of events is supposed to look like. Um, I know for me, kind of like I guess in a bigger picture kind of way, like I am so grateful, and I've kind of like gotten past this now, but I'm so grateful that I have manifested a life where I'm really doing what I love, right? Like I have this podcast, I'm coaching my one-on-one people. I get to have time and energy freedom. I'm passionate about everything that I'm doing. I'm really mixing my passions with my livelihood, right? And again, like the biggest part of that is to have more of that aspect of freedom. Um, and and so in the process of manifestation, right, like you're thinking about what your daily life is going to look like. You're thinking about how great it's going to feel to be able to breathe a little bit more in your daily life, in your schedule, and all that kind of good stuff. And then when it actually started unfolding and it came to fruition and I was able to leave my full-time job to focus on doing these things, I really struggled at first, because I still had these ideas in my head that I needed to be doing something all the time, right? Like I still tied a large portion of my value to my marriage in the money that I bring to the table, like my value as a person, of how much I'm kind of churning out, how productive I'm being, right? So when it came to the actual fruition of it, it really challenged this idea of like, well, this is this the way that it's supposed to happen? I don't know. Like it challenged my way of living, right? It challenged my way of thinking of like what I have to do and what I don't actually have to do anymore. It challenged my way of thinking around what I need to be focusing on in order to move the needle forward, but I no longer need to exhaust myself or try to force things to happen, right? I just kind of need to show up in the best way that I can and go from there. It challenged a lot of my inner beliefs in that way as well, that I get to have all of these things because of who I am, right? I'm worthy of this simply because I am me. I'm not worthy because of the money I make. I'm not worthy because of my production or my output. I'm worthy just because of who I am. And that's how I was able to come to have my manifestation already. So, and I, so then I think too, there was a little bit of this like, I also don't need to keep proving myself or, keep struggling or sacrificing to maintain the beauty and the freedom of the lifestyle that I'm able to have now. So it's like, this idea again, like, was this the way it was supposed to happen? Like you think, well, now I have this beautiful life, but now I feel like I'm, plunged into doing kind of this deep inner work, and it can be hard and uncomfortable, doing a lot of that internal rearranging in your heart and your mind. And you're like, well, goddamn, like that was not supposed to happen. But it was, because the more clearing we do, the more we make room for bigger and better things to happen, both internally and externally, right? I've read something recently that said something along the lines of like, people often ask the universe for cake, and the universe gives them the ingredients. It gives them flour, eggs, milk, sugar. It even gives them a bowl and a whisk. But then people get frustrated and they give up on the cake, right? Like we can, we again, like we think we have these biases around what life is supposed to look like, what our manifestations are supposed to look like, what our maybe the bigger picture of our life's journey is supposed to look like. And we desire certain things, and then when the universe is like, here, now you have everything you need to make it, we're like, but that's not what I asked for. Right? Like that wasn't supposed to happen that way. um and I just think it's so interesting to see how different people react to these different situations differently, right? Like when we're faced in the moment with this whole like, well, this is not the way that I planned it. This was not supposed to happen this way at all. It really is, so much less about that thing happening that way and so much more about what we do with it and how we perceive it, and the way that we're able to, I guess uh, to kind of simmer it down into a little vial, like how we make lemonade out of lemons. And as I was writing my blog post on this a couple of years ago, and as I was sitting here to kind of put together my outline for this episode, I kind of come back again to something that's like a bigger picture again. So, for example, like I've known since I was a little kid. I mean, I was probably like 5, 6, 7, maybe. Um, I just have known kind of forever that I've had this internal calling my heart's calling is to start some kind of a movement that would hopefully help people in an individual sense and also in a greater sense of communities and even over the world to evolve, to be more authentic, to find their joy, and to really embrace all of who they are, to embrace the natural gifts that they have, to embrace everything that makes them feel joyful, and to truly be free in their lives. And when I was 6 or 7, so not long after, I'm kind of coming into like the awareness of this. And at the same time, I'm also starting to come into an awareness that I'm very intuitive, and I'm, having psychic dreams and, all different kinds of things. And I'm trying to, just, just young enough that I'm not even like, well, what do I do with all of this? I'm just young enough that I'm starting to have an awareness of this, right? And then I'm like 6 or 7 years old, and out of the blue, we move from Austin, Texas to Wisconsin. It's not a tiny move. And all of the family that I had known was, in Austin. Like, that was all the family that I knew, that I had grown close to in my first few years of life, and that whole lifestyle and the weather and everything. So it's like this huge move, all of these, newer people that I don't know very well, this new climate, this new lifestyle, like everything, and when we first move up here, obviously, like, we've got the Southern accent, we've got this different kind of lifestyle. So, my first year of school here was first grade, and I got made fun of a lot for having the Southern accent, for loving Mexican food, for folding my pizza in half, like all kinds of things, when you're little, like you get bullied for. But, in the grander scheme of things, in all reality, it became very clear to me very quickly that like this was a place that I did not feel like I was at home. And I was like, this is not how my life was supposed to go at all, you know. But then in turn, we didn't live here very long before um, I started to realize that because our lives changed so drastically, that my sisters and I were actually able to have a better quality of life and a better education than we probably would have had in Austin, because the cost of living is so much higher in Austin than it is here, and then as, a few years kind of went by, then I started to develop like really horrible seasonal depression because our winters are so kind of like long and dark and harsh, so it was kind of this ebb and flow of like, I can see how things that I thought weren't supposed to happen, well, they actually turn out to be a good thing, right? Well, now I'm developing seasonal depression, probably around like middle school, high school, and eventually it gets so bad that right around like my freshman, sophomore year of college, I'm literally like, granted, this was like partly the seasonal depression from living here, and it was also partly that I was really not um, as in tune with my authenticity as I should have been. So there were a lot of things that I really kept bottled up into myself. But every winter, at least once, usually twice every winter, from I would say, again, like freshman year of college on for like a few years after that, I would have these days where I would lay in bed and just cry the entire day and just like bawl my eyes out. I would barely eat or drink anything. I just had so much shit bottled up inside of me, and I was so depressed that like once every winter, maybe twice, I just had to lay in bed and cry, and I just felt so debilitated by like these forces in my life. But in turn, that led me to this point where I was like, you know what? I've had enough of this shit. Like, I am taking my power back. I gotta do, I don't even care if I don't take all of my power back. Like, I gotta do something. Right. So that was when I started getting into martial arts. And not only did I discover that became like a passion of mine for many years, it really took me down this rabbit hole where I really discovered like my deep passion for holistic human healing. and community and connection to energy and to Mother Earth and to breath and to all of life, right? And in so many ways, right? So then I started like learning so much that I could, and I still do. I'm still always constantly learning new things about the human body and how it works and what makes it flourish. In the pursuit of my childhood dream of starting some kind of a movement, right? And so I'm learning all kinds of things about nutrition and how we can best support our bodies with, very natural, foods and water and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, movement is a huge part of this because the longer that I'm in martial arts, the more that I'm realizing that movement is not only a tool for physical health, it's also very much a way to channel out, some of our most uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. It's a way to kind of help process a lot of our thoughts and emotions and channel some of that uncomfortableness outward. It's a way to refill our cup, um, with really positive energy. It's a great way to develop community, right? Like all of these things are happening now because we moved here and I developed seasonal depression, right? And not only that, but I'm taking all these things that I'm learning and I decide to make them the foundation for my coaching business, which is why it is so holistic because it's exactly what I did to find my such deep level of healing. It's the basis of how I have healed myself and encouraged and inspired and coached so many other people along the way that other people, even people that I just wasn't even coaching in a traditional or formal sense, but that people that I knew and they would, ask me about things all the time, different things about nutrition and different kinds of exercises and how they deal with feeling like they should do one thing over another thing and how it is that they talk to themselves and have internal conversations and how like their friends group is an influence and how where they live is an influence and all these different aspects to life. And then one person I can think of in particular that I used to work with. So because we worked together, I was able to share a lot of this knowledge and have good, back and forth conversations with her about these sorts of things. And then when we, parted ways from where we worked together, I hadn't seen her for a few years. And then I just kind of, quote unquote, randomly ran into her at a Target one day and she had lost so much weight. Her skin was so clear and glowing. She was so happy. She was like, "Girl, you inspired me so much to just change my whole life, and I've never been happier, and I can't even thank you enough." And like, none of that would have happened. This podcast wouldn't happen. My blog, my website wouldn't happen. My entire coaching business, like, none of this would have happened had I not had seasonal depression because we moved up here from Texas. So we can think all we want that things aren't supposed to happen or that life is supposed to happen a certain way and not in a different way. And the reality is that it's just not true. It just isn't, like the reality is that just because we don't know why something is happening in the moment or why it just happened doesn't mean that it doesn't serve a greater purpose, not only for us, but for everyone we come into contact with. Just because something feels painful or challenging at first doesn't mean that it can't turn out to be something really positive and phenomenal that brings about some of life's greatest blessings to us, right? And so I think it's really important that we take a few things into consideration. First of all, we can, look at these examples and the many examples I'm sure that you're thinking of in your mind already when you thought like something wasn't supposed to happen a certain way and then it turned out to be a great thing. We can look at that and we can kind of like get the deduction that there's no such thing as a bad thing, right? And this is something that I usually have as part of like a foundational thing with my coaching clients. Like, there's no such thing as good or bad, there's helpful and unhelpful. And more often than not, I mean, like 99% of the time, something is actually helpful, even if it doesn't feel that way at first, right? And these are like prime examples of this. We can also look at this and know that we don't have to struggle to achieve great things in life. But when challenges do arise, we can choose to see the potential in both the situation, right? Like, this could lead to something amazing. We can also choose to see the potential within ourselves, to see that we can be more resilient and flexible, more that we are stronger, that we are more prepared and equipped and more blessed than perhaps we thought we were before, that thing happened. We can also kind of conclude that like, everything has a message behind it. I kind of like to think as a lot of especially when we think back again on some of like the little things that happen in our day-to-day life as, inconveniences. Again, like, you stub your toe on the couch, or you spill your sesame seeds on the counter. um we can look at these things as like a love note from the universe, from our creator, right? It's a love note. It's a little reminder, almost like the little message in a fortune cookie, right? Like, this shit happens, and then really it's because creator is like, whoa man, slow down. You don't need to be in such a hurry. You can take your time. You can be more mindful. Be more mindful. Be more in the present moment. Take a deep breath. Like, humans are so good at inhaling. We respirate so many times a day. We respirate so many times every minute. But really, like, for our own physical and mental health, we really need to practice exhaling and being more mindful with our breath in order to be more mindful in the moment and in life as a whole. Like, take a second, right? Take a second and feel how much air you're holding in your lungs, and because of that, how much tension you're holding in your shoulders, probably, right? Maybe in your neck, maybe in your jaw, maybe in your tailbone, right? Now, mindfully take an inhale, right? And now actually exhale all of it. Ooh, do you notice how much of that leaves you and how much more present you feel already? Right? So, like, if you're one of these people, like I was saying before, where you're really working on embodying like more peace, more patience, more joy, right? Like, more fulfillment, even, like all of those wonderful, beautiful things. It it absolutely serves you every single time to just be, if nothing else, be mindful of your breath, and to be mindful that we are exhaling fully and then inhaling fully thereafter, and continuing to inhale and exhale. There's so much more science behind, like the brainwave levels that we have throughout the day, and what our brain waves look like when we're stressed versus when we're feeling calm and safe and, at rest and at peace. And of course, there's, huge variations from that to when we're just falling asleep and then in our REM sleep, and all those kinds of things. But just getting back to like the breath and the meditation can do so much to regulate those and regulate mood. And there, it's good for so many things, and maybe I'll just have a separate episode on all of that kind of good stuff. But anyway, there's a couple more things that we can conclude from these perspectives. One is that we can all maybe have the belief just a little bit more that everything is always working out for our highest good, right? And so in a moment where I used to say like, that was not supposed to happen, right? I now say, well, that wasn't my intention, because it wasn't, and that's totally true, right? And so really it's like, oopsies, like, you know, um, but just because it wasn't my intention doesn't mean it wasn't creator's intention, right? Like just because it wasn't my intention to get stuck in traffic and be late for wherever I was going doesn't mean it wasn't creator's intention, right? And so if we can trust that creator is always got our back and is always working out life in favor of our highest good, then maybe it'll help us to let go of that perspective that certain things are bad or unhelpful, right? And the last thing is this, that not only is everything always working out for our highest good, but it's always happening in divine timing. It's all perfect, no matter how imperfect it may seem to us. And it's always happening exactly when it's meant to, right? Like we're always we're always having these kind of, I guess if I were Bob Ross, I would say happy little accidents throughout the day. They're happening at like right the perfect time. If we choose to see the perfection, if we choose to see the love note in them, if we choose to see that they can be super helpful for us, right? Um, and so I hope that this has all been helpful. I hope that it maybe gives you a little bit more insight into how truly like divine and divinely integrated and inspired the unfolding of your life really is, and how much we like to think we have control over, but we really don't, and that's actually a very beautiful thing, right? And just to kind of maybe move throughout your days and your weeks and your months and your years moving forward with just a little bit more kind of sense of like calm and trusting and peace. Um, so thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I do really hope that you found it very, nurturing to your inner landscape. You can support the show by clicking the link in the show notes to make a donation of any amount through Square. Your support not only helps me to keep going, but it also really helps me to do this without ads. The more support that I get, the less I have to even think about doing ads. Like, not that there aren't products and services that I use every day and I absolutely love, because I totally do, but this isn't what this is about for me. It's about being able to continue to offer, whatever level of wisdom and peace and healing that I'm able to offer through this podcast. So your support, your donations really not only give me that validation, but they help me to do it without ads and external support. You can also stay connected with me through time and space. There are links to my email list and my Instagram page in the show notes as well. Please make sure you subscribe to this podcast and share it so that together we can raise the vibration and the consciousness of the universe. Always remember, you are meant for more. It's coded within you, your power, your joy, your native growth. Thank you so much, my loves. Have a great day. Mwah.